Welcome back to the Stormgate series. I am Scrapbrain SC2. So in the last video, we went over the Vanguard tech tree, the buildings and the units. And now in this video, we're going to go over the Infernals, which is the second of the two races. Again, like I went over in the last video, they will be adding a third race, but we don't have that information yet. As I said before, Steam Next Fest is going on right now, February 5th through February 12th, so you have a full week of playing the game, you have full access to the 1v1 ladder, and you have access to a 3-player co-op versus AI mode. So please feel free to go to Steam, wishlist it. You'll have the QR code right here off to the side to be able to wishlist it, and try the game out for free. You have a full week to do so. So, with that, the Infernal is kind of a mix between the Zerg and the Protoss from StarCraft, if you're familiar with them at all. So one of the unique mechanics behind the Infernals that is taken from the Zerg is that when you build buildings, it will use up, it will destroy, you'll sacrifice the worker that makes it. So let's go ahead and look at the building structures here. So again, when you start into the game, you'll start with a shrine, and you'll start off with some number of the workers. And each building that you make will use the worker that you selected for it. Okay, so with the shrine, you're able to immediately make the meat farm. And the meat farm is what will allow you to build more units. As I went over in the last video, you will have different resources, including luminite, therium, and supply. The luminite is your basic resource that's used for every building and every unit. The therium is used for advanced buildings, advanced units, and upgrades. And then supply is holistically how many units you have on the field. So all of the units that are on the battlefield and any that are in production will take supply. Your supply will be denoted as a numerator and a denominator, and your denominator has to be larger than or equal to your numerator at any given period of time. So if you start off with 10 out of 15 supply, you can build 5 more workers, and then anything after that, you would have to wait until you build meat farms to be able to increase your supply cap. So meat farm is the basic building to allow you to build more units. It also has a unique mechanic where every 20 seconds it will spawn just a small defensive unit. You can't control the unit, it just sits by the meat farm, and you can have a maximum of 3 of them at any given period of time per meat farm. Once a 4th one would spawn, then the first one dies off, and that'll become useful and more relevant when we go over gameplay. The Infernals have a unique mechanic where you'll be able to utilize basically the souls of your units that die. And so the meat farm not only grants you supply, but will increase those like souls that you get. Moving on, when you have your shrine, you're able to upgrade that to a greater shrine, and that will unlock the Ritual Chamber and the Shadow Cleft. Now, those are both going to be buildings for higher tech units and upgrades. Instead, we're going to move over to the Iron Vault and the Conclave. These are our two main unit producing structures. So the Infernals don't really operate in the same way as the Vanguards. If you saw the Vanguards video, we had like the bio building, the mechanical building, and the air building. It doesn't quite work the same way, but I'm still going to use the same analogy. The Iron Vault is kind of like the bio building. Your more basic units, basic ground units, are going to be built from the Iron Vault, and the Conclave is going to be more the mechanical units. Now, all of the units for the shrine from the Iron Vault and the Conclave are biological units. They're not mechanical. But the Conclave units serve a role similar to the mechanical units for the Vanguard. So you have like a lot of high health, high armor, siege type units from the Conclave, and we'll look at those in just a moment. Now, what's also interesting about the Infernals is you see here that in order to get the Twilight Spire and the Shroud Stone, you need to have either the Iron Vault or the Conclave. You don't need both, but either one of them unlock both the Twilight Spire and the Shroud Stone. Now, the Twilight Spire is where you build your air units, and there's only 2 of them currently. And the Shroud Stone is part of a unique mechanic that we'll go over in just a little bit. So again, the Iron Vault, the Conclave, and the Twilight Spire are your unit-producing structures, and your Ritual Chamber and your Shadow Cleft are your tech structures for upgrades and whatnot. So moving on, this is the unit list for the Iron Vault. So again, these are like the biological equivalents from the Vanguard for the Infernals. So your basic unit is going to be the Brute, and then once you get the Shadow Cleft, you can get the Magmadon and the Hellborn. So again, the Brute is just like a pretty regular melee attacker, roughly on par with the Lancer for the Vanguard. And then the Magmadon and the Hellborn are stronger, more defensively minded, slow, beefy units that you can really start to snowball with. But you have to have the Shadow Cleft in order to get them. But again, all 3 of these units are produced from the Iron Vault. Similar to my suggestion with the Vanguard, you can build multiple Iron Vaults and you're able to produce more units. Now, what's one main key difference between the Infernals from the Vanguards is with the Vanguards, you have your unit producing structures, you select, hey, I want to make a Lancer, and then the time elapses for you to make the Lancer, and then it pops out and you can move it across the map to attack or whatever. With the Infernals, it works on a charge system. So when I spawn the Iron Vault, I can make a Brute immediately, right away. If I have the resources and the supply, I can make it, and then I'll build up a charge. And that charge can, once it's done, can be used to make a Brute, a Magmadon, or a Hellborn. Any of those. And it'll spawn immediately. And each Iron Vault can have up to 3 charges at a time. So I can have one Iron Vault, wait for all 3 of the charges, and then spam out 3 units at the same time. The issue with that is because you're still limited to 3 charges at a time, you'll still likely want to have more Iron Vaults than just one, so that you can ideally not store up charges in most situations. You want to be spending your resources as soon as you get them to get a larger army to be able to snowball. But in the case that you maybe have gone into the very, very late game and you can't produce any more units, you've hit the supply cap, but you're still banking resources, then you can bank up these charges also to flood out a second wave of units immediately. And so that's a very nice mechanic that is similar to the Zerg in that regard from StarCraft. Above these units, above the Brute, the Magmadon, and the Hellborn, you'll see that there's a bar, and that bar is half white and half kind of gray. That is kind of where they get inspiration from the Protoss. So in StarCraft, the Protoss have shields, and the shields will regenerate over time. Once you get your units down to 0 shields, then they'll start taking health damage. Now, the Infernal units work similarly. They have an area called the Shroud, which is around their main bases, and then around the Shroud Stone, which I pointed out before. So this Shroud operates similarly to the Creep for Zerg, for those of you that have played StarCraft or StarCraft 2. The Shroud is just an area around your shrines and around your Shroud Stones, and when your units are in there, they'll get various bonuses. One of the key bonuses is that any units that you have will regain this white shield bar. If your units are off of Shroud, then they'll be stuck at whatever they are. Units spawn in with half of their white bar filled, and as they stay on the Shroud, then it will refill over time. And again, your units can lose all of their shield before they start taking actual life damage. And so if you're able to, engage in a battle, take shield damage but not life damage, and then retreat back to the Shroud, then you can recover that white health, and then your unit will be as good as new. Moving on, this is our mech structure and units. These are all made from the Conclave. Your basic mech unit is the Gaunt, and it's a kind of fast melee unit. You're able to add it in similarly to a Hedgehog, where it's just kind of a basic, all-around good utility unit for adding into your army. You can do some harassment with it. But once you get the Ritual Chamber, you're able to get the Weaver. And the Weaver is very large, very slow, and a heavy siege unit. So the issue with the Weaver is that getting any number of Weavers from your side of the map to the opponent's side to do any kind of offensive ability takes a long time. Again, they're very slow. And then the Doombringer is requires the Greater Spire, or sorry, the Greater Shrine. I apologize. And this is your air unit for the Conclave. And so this can bypass any kind of terrain issues, and you can move out for an offensive. And then the last group of units here is your traditional air units. So this requires the Twilight Spire, and your basic air unit is the Shadow Flyer. Now, anybody who's used to StarCraft Brood War, this is very, very, very similar to Scourge. So these Shadow Flyers are exploding units. They're not very fast, but they will basically like fly into enemy air units and explode them. They're very good at controlling airspace. So if your opponent has any air units of their own, they really have to maneuver their units away from your Shadow Flyers and specifically target them down to prevent losing air superiority. It can be very powerful to control that space, but because they are so much slower than Scourge were, then it's not as easy to gain that superiority. It can be pretty tough. What I would imagine you would want to do if you're trying to use this in like a 1v1, for example, is form kind of a concave around the opposing air units, so that in order to not be surrounded by your Shadow Flyers, they would have to back up and retreat, and then lose the air support for the opposing ground units, and then you can move in with your either air-to-ground units or your ground-to-ground units to be able to take over ground superiority and take over space that way. Once you get the Ritual Chamber, then you're able to build the Spirigan, I believe is how it's pronounced, and that's a generic air attacker, similar to what we see from the Vanguard side. Now, another thing that's very unique between the Infernals and the Vanguard is both races have a top bar. So this is where the souls that I was talking about before come into play. One of the reasons why you would want to, for example, have several meat farms, not only to increase your supply, but also to generate those 3 units that will stay by and die off, is you'll be able to farm up these souls. And the Infernals can use these souls for various effects, including spreading the Shroud in a localized area across the entire map. And the ultimate one, which requires 300 of these souls, is to summon an Infernal Dragon, which is extremely powerful, but it takes a very long time to get those 300 souls. So that is another air unit that you have access to, but it's very, very, very late game, but it is extremely powerful. So again, this game is now available for a week during Steam Next Fest if you would like to try it out. I will be streaming tonight, February 5th. If you would like to come in, you can watch me play. You can play with me. I'm going to be doing a lot of the 3v1, or sorry, not 3v1, 3-player co-op versus AI. And that will have some extra mechanics to it as well that I'll go over during the stream, and I'll upload videos on that in the future. So if you would like to join me, the link is down below. It is twitch.tv/scrapbrainsc2. I'll be streaming live at 7 p.m. Central Time, and please drop by and say hi. So I'll see you then.